Readings of horror.
No End House. Let me start by saying that Peter Terry was addicted to heroin. We were friends in college and continued to be after I graduated. Notice that I said I. He dropped out after 2 years of barely cutting it. After I moved out of the dorms and into a small apartment, I didn't see Peter as much. We would talk online every now and then. AIM was king in pre-Facebook years. There was a period where he wasn't online for about 5 straight weeks. I wasn't worried. He was a pretty notorious flake and drug addict, so I assumed he just stopped caring. Then one night I saw him log on. Before I could initiate a conversation, he sent me a message. "David, man, we need to talk." That was when he told me about the No End House. It got that name because no one had ever reached the final exit. The rules were pretty simple and cliche. Reach the final room in the building and win $500. There were 9 rooms in all. The house was located outside the city, roughly 4 miles from my house. Apparently Peter had tried and failed. He was a heroin and who knows what the fuck addict. So I figured the drugs got the best of him and he wigged out at a paper ghost or something. He told me it would be too much for anyone, that it was unnatural. I didn't believe him. I told him I would check it out the next night, and no matter how hard he tried to convince me otherwise, $500 sounded too good to be true. I had to go. I set out the following night. When I arrived, I immediately noticed something strange about the building. Have you ever seen or read something that shouldn't be scary, but for some reason, a chill crawls up your spine? I walked towards the building, and the feeling of uneasiness only intensified as I opened the front door. My heart slowed, and I let a relieved sigh leave me as I entered. The room looked like a normal hotel lobby decorated for Halloween. A sign was posted in the place of a worker. It read, "Room 1 this way. 8 more follow. Reach the end and you win." I chuckled and made my way to the first door. The first area was almost laughable. The decor resembled the Halloween aisle of a Kmart, complete with sheet ghosts and animatronic zombies that gave a static growl when you passed by. At the far end was an exit. It was the only door besides the one I entered through. I brushed through the fake spider webs and headed for a second room. I was greeted by fog as I opened the door to room 2. The room definitely upped the ante in the terms of technology. Not only was there a fog machine, a bat hung from the ceiling and flew in circles. Scary. They seemed to have a Halloween soundtrack that one would find in a 99-cent store on loop somewhere in a room. I didn't see the stereo, but I guess they must have used a PA system. I stepped over a few toy rats and wheeled around and walked with a puffed chest across to the next area. I reached for the doorknob. My heart sank to my knees. I did not want to open the door. A feeling of dread hit me so hard that I could barely even think. Logic overtook me after a few terrified moments, and I shook it off and entered the next room. Room 3 is when things began to change. On the surface, it looks like a normal room. There was a chair in the middle of a wood-planked floor. A single lamp in the corner did a poor job of lighting the area, casting a few shadows across the floor and walls. That was a problem. Shadows, plural. With the exception of the chairs, there were others. I had barely walked in the door, and I was already terrified. It was at the moment that I knew something wasn't right. I didn't even think as I automatically tried to open the door I came through. It was locked from the other side. That set me off. Was someone locking the doors as I progressed? There was no way. I would have heard them. Was it a mechanical lock that set automatically? Maybe, but I was too scared to really think. I turned back to the room, and the shadows were gone. The chair's shadows remained, but the others were gone. I slowly began to walk. I used to hallucinate when I was a kid, so I wrote off the shadows as a figment of my imagination. I began to feel better as I made it to the halfway point of the room. I looked down, and as I took my steps, that's when I saw it, or didn't see it. My shadow wasn't there. I didn't have time to scream. I ran as fast as I could to the other door and flung myself, without thinking, into the room beyond. The 4th room was possibly the most disturbing. As I closed the door, all light seemed to be sucked out and put back into the previous room. I stood there surrounded by darkness, not able to move. I'm not afraid of the dark, and never have been, but I was absolutely terrified. All sight had left me. I held my hand in front of my face, and if I didn't know what I was doing, I would never have been able to tell. Darkness doesn't describe it. I couldn't hear anything. It was dead silence. When you're in a soundproof room, you can still hear yourself breathing. You can hear yourself being alive. I couldn't. I began to stumble forward after a few moments, my rapidly beating heart the only thing I could feel. There was no door in sight. Wasn't even sure if there was one this time. The silence was then broken by a low hum. I felt something behind me. I spun around wildly but could barely even see my nose. I knew it was there though. Regardless of how dark it was, I knew something was there. The hum grew louder, closer. It seemed to surround me, but I knew whether it was causing the noise in front of me, inching closer. I took a step back. I had never felt that kind of fear. I can't really describe true fear. I wasn't even scared I was going to die. I was scared of what the alternative was. I was afraid of what the thing had in store for me. Then the lights flashed for a second and I saw it. Nothing. I saw nothing. And I know I saw nothing there. The room was again plunged into darkness, and the hum became a wild screech. I screamed in protest. I couldn't hear this goddamn sound for another minute. I ran backwards, away from the noise, and fumbled for a door handle. I turned and fell into room 5. Before I describe room 5, you have to understand something. I am not a drug addict. I have no history of drug abuse or any sort of psychosis, short of the childhood hallucinations I mentioned earlier. And those were only when I was really tired or just waking up. I entered the no-end house with a clear head. After falling in from the previous room, my view of room 5 was from my back, looking up at the ceiling. What I saw didn't scare me, it simply surprised me. Trees had grown into the room and towered above my head. The ceilings in this room were taller than the others, which made me think I was in the center of the house. I got up off the floor, dusted myself off, and took a look around. It was definitely the biggest room of them all. I couldn't see the door where I was at. Various bushes and trees must have blocked my line of sight with the exit. Up to this point, I figured the rooms were going to get scarier, but this was a paradise compared to the last room. I also assumed whatever in room 4 stayed back there. I was incredibly wrong. As I made my way deeper into the room, I began to hear what one would hear if they were in a forest. Chirping, bugs, and the occasional flap of birds seemed to be my only company in this room. That was the thing that bothered me the most. I hear the bugs and the other animals, but I didn't see any of them. I began to wonder how big this house was. From the outside, when I first walked up to it, it looked like a regular house. It was definitely on the bigger side, but it was almost a full forest in here. The canopy covered my view of the ceiling, but I assumed it was still there, however high it was. I couldn't see any walls either. The only way I knew I was still inside was the floor matched the other rooms. The standard dark wood paneling. I kept walking, hoping that the next tree I passed would reveal the door. After a few moments of walking, I felt a mosquito fly onto my arm. I shook it off and kept going. A second later, I felt about 10 more land on my skin, at different places. I felt them crawl up and down my arms and legs, and few made their way across my face. I flailed wildly to get them off, but they just kept crawling. I looked down and let out a muffled scream, more of a whisper, to be honest. I didn't see a single bug. Not one bug was on me, but I could feel them crawl. I heard them fly by my face and sting my skin, but I couldn't see a single one. I dropped to the ground and began to roll wildly. I was desperate. I hated bugs, especially ones that I couldn't see or touch. But these bugs could touch me, and they were everywhere. I began to crawl. I had no idea where I was. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share.